Welcome everyone, Christine here with a discussion about the Changeling in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. This is easily the least popular campaign in the game at the moment. But Creative Assembly has stated that they will not be updating this campaign in 6.1 because their official statement on this is they know a lot of people dislike it, but they also feel a lot of people do like it. At least that's what they stated, that there are people who do like this campaign. How should you interpret that statement? Well, my perspective on it is the Changeling is the least popular campaign in the game at the moment. Of all the campaigns in the game, in poll after poll, in overwhelming sentiment on Reddit, on forums, on Discord, this campaign comes out either at the bottom or very close to the bottom alongside someone like the Demon Prince. That is a fact. But Creative Assembly's thinking on the subject might just very well be, well, we know a lot of people that did buy SOC hated this campaign, but we also know a lot of people didn't buy Shadows of Change because of the price point, the packaging, if you will, of the DLC. So what Creative Assembly is doing, they're changing the packaging of Shadows of Change. They're splitting off the DLCs to be purchased individually. So the Legendary Lords will be purchased individually. So you'll have a DLC for Yanbo, one for Astankia, and one for the Changeling. And then they probably want to get more data to work with. On top of that, you can imagine that Creative Assembly probably doesn't want to put in the time, effort, and energy to update this campaign. Because it isn't a case like, would say, updating the Empire. Updating the Empire as a race to improve the campaigns available there. No, they have to do this for Siege. They kind of back themselves in a corner because they made the Changeling so unique with his elements and his schemes compared to Kairos that fixing this campaign would require a lot of effort, time and energy that would only be applicable for this particular campaign. Whereas they could be spending those resources on improving other campaigns by improving the races for those campaigns, like improving the High Elves, improving Dark Elves, improving Skaven, whatever, any other race in the game, any other campaign, or the vast majority of other campaigns can be improved in a lot of ways by improving situations with the race. Whereas with the Changeling, they can only improve the Changeling himself. To be certain, there are things I do feel they can do for Siege to improve the situation, but there's a lot of uniqueness available for the Changeling. So it's a question of how many resources did they want to allocate, whether or not it's even worth devoting those resources for this campaign towards fixing this campaign. But make no mistake on this. This is a really bad campaign in Warhammer 3, and I'm going to go over the details of why that is. One of the issues that this campaign has, and one of the things that they could actually easily fix, really, is the problem of the Siege unit roster and how that unit roster is available. Now, I'm kind of hoping that with updates with Kairos that this will actually have a trickle-down effect towards the Changeling, because it is one of those things that could work. Keep in mind, there's a lot of uniqueness to the Changeling that requires effort dedicated towards him. But there are certainly some things that Creative Assembly could do for Siege as a whole. The problem is, when you're playing a Siege campaign, be it Kairos or the Changeling, you're never incentivized to diversify your army. And this is especially relevant for someone like the Changeling, because the Changeling doesn't deal with as much empire building, diplomacy, etc. as other campaigns do. I mean, you can deal with diplomacy, it's just not gonna work in this campaign as it does in other campaigns, because you can't use one of the greatest tools that makes diplomacy work in Warhammer 3, which is region trading. And also, you're kind of pissing off a lot of people with your various actions on the campaign map, so diplomacy just doesn't flat out doesn't work with the Changeling, which is a shame, because maybe the Changeling should be someone that engages in diplomacy. But the problem is, because you're taking actions that piss off various factions, you end up in a diplomatic situation like, yeah, some people are going to like you, some people are going to hate you, and it's very difficult to change that kind of situation. So you don't really have a lot of diplomatic flexibility, as you really should. But the problem with units specifically is you do have the ability of theoretically getting a lot of structures for unit recruitment, but then you have severe limitations on how many structures you can get because of the cult supplies. So you can make a lot of cults, but you do have a significant limitation that's not even tied to gold. Like, if it was a question of gold, we could work with that. But no, we have to work with cult supplies, so we can't build as many things as other factions can. And even in a Kairos campaign, you basically, the way you play a Kairos campaign is you get this building over here, which unlocks Sandgors and Forsaken, then Warriors of Chaos, and also unlocks 2 different heroes, both of which are useful. You get this building chain, and you only really build things that are available over here, because there's no reason whatsoever to go for anything else besides fluff. And it is fluff. Like, regardless of how many change bringers or burning chariots or anything like that you might want to get in an army, nothing will compare to the combat ability of having a bunch of Sandgors, Forsaken of Tzeentch very early on, and then switching to cast Warriors of Tzeentch and cast Warriors of Tzeentch with halberds, and eventually going down towards Chosen. There's no army that Tzeentch can build that is comparable to that. And even things like Cockatrices, Greater Demons, Lords of Changes, they're more units you put in an army to complement them, but they're completely irrelevant because you don't need them. An entire army of Forsaken of Tzeentch, which are baseline units that are available with or without SOC, will defeat a lot of foes that you do encounter. And if you do have SOC, an entire army of Sandgors will defeat the vast majority of things. Sure, you are required to get Champions of Chaos to really make this work properly, certainly, but at the same time, there's a lot of reasons why you want to go with this building chain, even if you don't own the Champions of Chaos. And just to note, if you're playing any Chaos campaign, any of the Mono Gods, you should get Champions of Chaos. The units that it provides are a significant change in that. Otherwise, like, yes, you might get a build. Otherwise, in terms of other unit recruitment, and keep in mind, with the Changeling, you have severe limitation because of cult supplies, so you can't get as many buildings as you'd want. With Kairos, you have a limitation of economy. Hopefully that does get fixed. But outside of that, if you do want to diversify things, you're much better off going for the Monument of Potential and also the Cult of the Seeds, because you get 2 more heroes for those 2 buildings. And that is just a much better situation, especially since one of those heroes is a casualty replenishment hero and the other one is a campaign movement range hero. That is one of the problems. So the diversity of armies in a Changeling campaign is very weak. It is not great. And even if you do have diversity, it's fluff, because the vast majority of battles can be easily won with Forsaken, Sandgors, and then Cast Warriors and Chosen. So some unit recruitment changes would make this campaign substantially better than where it is. I understand why Creative Assembly made with that statement, but I think that this is one of the things that should be changed for Tzeentch, not just for the Changeling. It should be changed for Kairos, it should be changed for the Changeling, and that is such a ridiculous statement. Changed for the Changeling, yeah, that's stupid. But really, the unitary requirements, the different buildings, the way the economy works, the way cult supply works, or the way the economy works for Kairos, that is one of the things that Creative Assembly should address. But that is just the tip of the iceberg with the Changeling. It is just a really boring campaign to play. It is a nothing campaign, really. Because an army like this, and it's very easy to acquire, very easy to recruit, doesn't require a lot of effort. You can easily get an army like this, and you will defeat the vast majority of opponents you encounter with it. And armies on the field, like armies that aren't in settlements, will be running away from you. And that creates a situation where you're constantly attacking settlements in this campaign, which is as fun as dirt. Dealing with sieges, dealing with minor settlement battles is not a fun and engaging system. On top of that, when you're playing a Tzeentch campaign, you're kind of incentivized to actually build cults, right? When you're playing a Changeling campaign. But building those cults inherently means you're leaving those elements alive. And that means next turn, and keep in mind, when you build a cult in a settlement, like when you are interacting with the settlement, you can either raise it or build a cult. Building a cult counts as sacking the settlement, but both of them consume your movement range. And the issue there is when you're doing so, you might end up in a situation, turn after turn after turn, where the very settlements that you attacked previously, where you built cults, are now an obstacle in your way. And you don't want to destroy them, actually, but you may be forced to. It is not a fun and engaging system. You're also creating a situation where you're attacking factions, you're pissing them off, you're pissing off their allies, potentially, or other factions that might like them, but you're not destroying them. And that creates a lot of headaches. I get that what they were trying to do is make it an objective-based campaign focused on trolling. It doesn't work. Because when you're leaving factions alive, when you're not destroying them, you're just creating more and more obstacles. Now, the way Creative Assembly fixed that, quote-unquote, in the initial release of SOC was they made all your armies invisible if they're in an area in a cult. They can't be attacked. You get to decide whether or not they do attack. But that just makes the entire campaign a pointless fluff, because you know you're never going to be risking anything substantially. Technically, if you do lose all your armies, your cults do become visible. If you do lose an army, and if you lose a battle, you lose an army, the cult in the region becomes visible. If you lose all your armies, all your cults become visible. But realistically, it's very easy to get to a point where the AI is not going to take aggressive action against your cults. So you end up in this risk-free campaign where the intent of this campaign is to be trolling, to have objectives, but you don't even feel a sense of progression towards it because the actions you have are not meaningful enough in terms of affecting the AI. And that's not just the question of you fighting battles and setting up cults, defeating enemies, or not defeating enemies in this case. It also has to do with the unique Changeling mechanics as well. And this especially applies on higher difficulties, but also lower difficulties as well. See, the whole point of the Changeling campaign is these objectives over here in the theaters of war. I'm going to say it very clearly that Oxyatl, Arbol, and Malachi have substantially better objective-based campaigns. First off, their objectives are not buggy. And they generally work. Like, for instance, over here in the Ulfuan Theater, one objective is failed because one of the Phoenix Gates has been destroyed. Like, this is one of the reasons they should update the Changeling. Beyond anything else I've said already, one of the reasons they need to update this campaign is to fix these kind of issues, right? Where you're failing objectives because some AI faction got ahead of you towards it, or something didn't work out, or say, for instance, you attack Hell Pit, right? And there's an objective over here to sack Hell Pit, but what if Hell Pit gets raised? You might not complete that objective. There are a lot of problems like this. A comparison I would make, remember how Tyrion couldn't get his quest item because of the Phoenix Gate requirement? That is the essential aspect of the Changeling campaign, is that situation where Tyrion initially couldn't get his quest item because of the Phoenix Gate quest requirement, but on many, many more objectives in the Changeling campaign. And that does happen a lot. It might not be so obvious, but it's and typically the AI won't just cause you to lose those objectives. But it's very easy to end up in a situation where you're not able to complete objectives. It's rare to see an objective fail, like the Ulfuan case, but it does happen as well. So that's another thing. The lack of risk, coupled with an objective-based system that just doesn't work that well. Now, the main... and on top of that, on top of the fact that the objective-based system doesn't work that well, it's also the way you go around doing these objectives. you already have armies that are far more powerful than anyone else, right? You have a situation where maybe factions, where you can go around the map very easily, though not quickly, but very easily, without risking that much. But it also takes time. Because unlike Oxiato, unlike Arbol, who have teleportation, Sinch, the one faction who should be focused on that, does not have objective-based teleportation. I mean, obviously the quest battles you get do allow you to teleport to them, but I'm talking about being able to teleport to these objectives. Yes, you do have various portals that you can set up in specific locations, but in the theaters of operation that he does have, there's maybe 1 or 2 portals at most, and you set them up in specific ways, like either doing some kind of objective, which by the way may bug out, or getting some research if you have the resources over here at the Trickster Rift resource to open those portals. Compare this to, say, Bellicor. Like, forget the Arbol and Seattle who just teleport around the map without a care in the world. Consider Bellicor's system of rifts. Bellicor sets rifts whatever he wants. It does have a cooldown, to be sure, but you can decide where you want to set the rift, and you save so much time. This is the problem of the Changeling. It is an ultimate expression of what I would call the Intern Button Simulator campaign in Warhammer 3. For some people, this can be fun, to be sure. But it does. But for a lot of other people, this certainly loses its charm very quickly. It's a nothing campaign. If there's no risk in playing a campaign, then that means there's no thought put into it. There's nothing exciting happening, and that's the problem. The armies you have are boring to use. The battles you fight are boring to fight because they're not. The vast majority of them are not challenging. An army like this can fight 3-4 times its numbers and still win without any effort. You're just going to spend half an hour watching Sangors or Cast Warriors and Forsaken just clawing away at the enemy. That is not fun and engaging gameplay. But then you also have the ultimate objectives, the quest battles that you're dealing with towards the ultimate schemes. Let's talk about the schemes. The quest battles, you do have a quest battle at the end of every theater of war, and then you have an ultimate campaign battle. These are fun once, or twice. Then they get very boring very quickly. But here's the problem. You're supposed to get some provincial effect happening where, you're doing... You're like a Scooby-Doo villain or a Saturday morning cartoon villain doing some evil deed. But the problem is, even that is not impactful. Partly because the factions that might be impacted by it are either dead or so ridiculously strong that they trivialize it. Or partly because the action itself is not that powerful to begin with. Like, for instance, over here, I did start the Civil War in the Empire, and you're going to see Karl fighting Elspeth. That is going to be substantial. But the Electricons fighting Karl Franz, I'm going to tell you straight up, Karl Franz is going to annihilate them very, very quickly. And that is also an issue in the design of this campaign. There are a couple of schemes that can be substantial, like, like stealing Norscan armies and then teleporting to Ulfwan or Cathay. But then there's other things that are just not really substantial at all. So, for instance, you can cause an entire Greenskin Labor rebellion across the Darklands. It is a cool quest battle, to be sure. But the problem that happens, it gets defeated in one turn flat. Because it's not powerful enough to stand with it. You have some really cool ideas, like, you go into the Badlands and the Southlands, right? And you steal the Black Pyramid of Nagash. That should be an awesome thing to do, right? But then you teleport the Black Pyramid of Nagash to a particular location, and it does very, very little. And so the impact of your schemes and all the trolling you're doing is, a lot of the times, actually minimal. Like, even Norska over here, right? Dependent on the pacing. Like, even Norska being teleported with a couple of armies. I'm going to say flat out, Nakari or Elfarian are going to obliterate the Norskans over here in a couple of turns. and this entire scheme will be meaningless. There are a few times where you can have some meaningful action, but it's generally for a combination of various things. So, for instance, you can really fuck Wolf 1 up, because you can teleport Norska to Wolf 1, you can then unleash the Cult of Pleasure, and if you destroy the Phoenix Gate, you can get Cast Rebels. If you were to theoretically do all of these things at once, that could potentially wipe out the massive blob of High Elves in Wolf 1. But even then, I would not hold my breath on that, because Tyrion is Tyrion, and he's probably just going to obliterate Norska in a couple of turns flat. That's just the reality of Warhammer 3 at the moment. It is not a great situation to deal with this campaign. It doesn't feel impactful. It is tedious, is slow, because you're spending a lot of turns just going around doing these objectives. Like, for instance, you're going around, oh, I have to fight 12 battles against Norska. That is really fun to do, by the way. You also have a situation where you're having to go against things that would naturally come to you to just do these kind of objectives. Like, why would I want to find Norska as a Chaos faction? What, just for the shits and giggles? As an example. Or in the Empire Theater, for instance, you have this quest to go fight, to win 15 land battles in the Empire Theater. You literally have to go out of your way and waste your time to complete these kind of objectives. Now, they're not important necessarily to do, but that's the thing. A lot of these objectives are pure fluff. There are, thankfully, every theater of war has enough objectives that are easy enough to do, but they all consume time. Like, just consider this objective in the Darklands. Go to Pig Barter, set up a building, spend your cult supplies, wait for that building to get constructed, and then you will be able to get this objective done. It is such a significant waste of freaking time. Because you're, okay, like, let's consider the building, right? Chamber of Agony, right? So you consider Chamber of Agony, like if we look at the objective of the Darklands. Go set up a Chamber of Agony or a Twisted Valerie, right? Let's look at how many turns it takes up to set up either a Twisted Valerie or a Chamber of Agony. Keep in mind, there is a way to build this faster, because there are some special cultists, trickster cultists, that could just do it instantly. But, like, for instance, over here, I sent 3 cultists over here in the Darklands, and one of them is going to go for Pig Bar. So in the best case scenario, you know, you're looking at what, 10 turns to get over there to build it, or keep in mind the total traversal time. But if you were to build it from scratch, which some of these objectives certainly will require, you're looking not at 10 turns to build it. No, you're looking at 17 turns to build it from scratch. Is a complete waste of time. So if you're looking for an interim button simulator campaign, this is a good expression of it. But I think the data out there is very clear. This campaign is not great. It's not popular. A lot of people do dislike it. Now, I also want to end with this. I do not think that the worth of a campaign is, or whether or not something is good or bad, should be determined just by popular opinion. Especially with imperfect data. So I understand where Creative Assembly is coming from. I certainly hope they're not using the poor sales that SOC had and the limited data that they did get as a result of that, because a lot of people didn't play this campaign. Let's be certain on this. The vast majority of the player base did not buy Shadows of Change. If even 10 or 5% of the player base bought Shadows of Change, that would be surprising. So maybe they're looking at getting better data. But I'm certainly hoping they won't use that as an excuse to allow things to continue as they are. Things could be better, and this campaign should have been a lot more interesting than this. The idea of a narrative-focused, objective-based campaign could be really interesting. That's one of the reasons Malachi's campaign works. Really. Hell, that's one of the reasons Tamarkan campaign, despite my issues with Nurgle and the campaign pacing on Nurgle, I think Tamarkan is a great legendary lord. But the Changeling just flat out doesn't work. Like, I would rather play Axial's campaign. A final note. I think that Creative Assembly should get off their ass and actually start doing proper voice acting and proper cinematics and storylines, etc. Not just, oh, we have like maybe one dialogue paragraph for these objectives, and we have like 2 cinematics in the entire campaign or something like that. That is just lazy. That is really just lazy. And it's not a question of it's not a financial question from my point of view. It would have, but then again, they spent all their money on freaking hyenas, so what do I know? Costine, signing out.